Good evening, everyone. Welcome you all to our Project Hope. Our guest is Medhani Hewagama. She pursued her MBBS in the University of Colombo. She did her MD in Psychiatry in the year 2013, and she is a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. She is currently working as a resident psychiatrist at the National Hospital of Sri Lanka. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Medhani. Over to you, Doctor.
Hi, thank you. Welcome everybody to this workshop on depression. I would really like it if you all can on your videos, because then that will make it a bit more interesting and more interactive than speaking to an empty sort of audience. So those who would like to, please switch on your mic, your videos. And I would really like it if you all would sort of ask questions and, sort of contribute to a discussion, because that will make it a bit more interesting. So today we're going to talk about depression. And when I say depression, what pops into your mind? Can you, Kavisha, shall I share my screen?
Yeah, sure, doctor.
Okay, so right. I'm going to stop the video for a bit. So, when you hear the word depression, what comes to mind? Can somebody just say one word that comes to mind? So not a big explanation, but just maybe a word.
Self-harm.
Okay, so self-harm. All right. Anybody else?
Sadness.
Sadness. Yes. What else?
Hating anything and everything around them, anybody or anything that's around them.
Yes. So not liking or hating things. Anything else?
Demotivation.
Yeah, demotivation, not wanting to do things, not feeling like doing things. Anything else?
Tired.
Yeah, it's really good. So you guys are aware of a lot of things about depression. So feeling tired, unusually tired. Anything else? Okay, so all of those things that you mentioned are actually linked to depression, right? So what is depression? Well, I'll give you a little introduction about what depression is, and then we'll go on to look at what sort of features that you get in it. So if somebody has depression, what are the things that they would feel or think? And then we'll go on to looking at what causes depression and how you can reduce it. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about suicide, because it's linked to depression very closely, and it's very important. Okay, so everybody is welcome to just stop me and ask questions, or if you want to send it in the chat, you can just send it directly to me and then I will answer that within the discussion itself. Okay. So, what is depression? So depression is what we call as doctors a mood disorder. So it involves an abnormality in your mood. So the moods that we know about are, say, a sad mood, a happy mood, angry mood, and anxious mood. So those are all moods, right? So you, at times, if you hear some really good news, you might feel happy. And if you hear bad news, like for instance, you haven't got that much sort of a good result in your exam, you might feel a little bit sad, a little bit maybe really sad. But you know, those are all changes in your mood, and it's quite normal to have changes in your mood. Okay, so that is not depression. Feeling sad when you hear some sad news is normal and it's not depression. But sometimes the mood that you have, the sad mood that you have, can persist. So it can be there for days and days. And when it goes on for days and days without changing, and you don't feel happy at all, and you know, you can't sort of come out of it, then it is possible that it is a depression. So depression is a change in your mood. Just going to that a bit. Okay, so it's a change in your mood, and it's actually a low mood. So a change in your mood towards the sad side of it, right? And it's more in females than in males. So girls and women tend to have twice as many females tend to get depression than males. But you do see it in boys as well. And depression can be there in sort of young children. It's been recorded in young children, even as young as 6 years old, up to, you know, up to the really elderly. But it's quite uncommon to see it in younger children, especially those less than 12 years. It's not very common, but we do see it. But as you grow up and as you reach your 20s and then you go on to your 30s, 40s, 50s, it becomes even more common. So we see it in all age ranges, in all ages, but it's less common in the really young and more common after you turn about 20 onwards. But even younger than like between 12 and 20, we do see young children, adolescents who get depression.
Excuse me. Can I know why females or girls have it more than men? Is there any reason for it?
Well, we don't know exactly why. I mean, there's no one reason. We think that it's probably something to do. I mean, it's probably a collection of different reasons. One might be hormonal change or differences. Another might be that they have children, and so childbirth is, I will talk about it a little bit later. So when women have children, they have more risk of getting depression. And another might be that they face more stresses possibly through their lifetime. So we think those are some of the reasons, but this difference is seen worldwide. So everywhere in the world, and we see that more women get depression than men. And it's not only depression, it's also another type of mood abnormality, which we call anxiety. You might have heard about it. So anxiety is also commoner in females than males.
Okay, thank you.
So, so you now, how common is it actually? We think that about 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 people will, within their lifetimes, have an episode of depression. Might be very mild depression, or it might be a severe depression. But if you take all the different types of depression that there is, we expect 1 in 5 roughly to experience a depressive episode during their lifetime. So that's quite common actually, which means that you yourselves might have either seen somebody with depression, maybe a friend, maybe a family member, or yourself experience a little bit of low mood or depression. Okay, so think back to somebody you might know who has depression, and then you will understand what I'm talking about. Right. So when I asked you to say some words or what pops into your mind when I say depression, you said a few things. So somebody said sadness, right? And then you said feeling tired and then not enjoying things. So those three actually are the major features of depression, right? And I've just put here that now when we think about depression, it's something that occurs episodically. That means it's there for a period of time and then it resolves. Even without medication, the depression can disappear, but it is possible that it will reoccur. So, in a certain percentage of people, depending on what the reason is for their depression, it can occur. And so, depression is an episodic illness. That means it comes from time to time, and in between you're perfectly normal, you recover from it, you go on with your life, but then it can occur again. So we talked about sadness and we call it low mood or a depressed mood because it's a little bit different to sadness. So when you feel sad, what happens is usually when you forget about what has caused you to be sad or when you're distracted, your mood becomes normal. That is what you see usually with sadness. So you're not sad forever. You're not sad, every minute of the day. But with low mood, it's almost like you're sad all the time. And some people describe it as having a dark cloud hanging over their heads because it just everything feels so dark and bleak and very dull. So low mood is one of the major symptoms of depression. And then there's that tiredness that one of you mentioned. So you feel tired and you find it really difficult to drag yourself out of bed and go for classes or go and meet your friends or do things that you usually do. So if you're feeling really, really tired all the time, despite not actually having done anything really strenuous, right? That is, we call it lethargy or tiredness. That is also a major symptom of depression. And then the other one is somebody mentioned not enjoying things. So usually when we do something, we enjoy it. It might be having a meal, it might be talking to a friend on the phone or just going for a walk, but then we gain pleasure out of it, right? But when we are depressed, those things which we used to enjoy before are not very enjoyable. So this is also a symptom of depression, and we call it anhedonia, and sometimes we call it a lack of pleasure. Right. So those are the three main symptoms of depression. But with that, we get some other things. So we start getting negative thoughts. Can anybody guess what sort of negative thoughts they might be? What do you think you'd get if you're depressed?
Suicidal thoughts?
Yes. So you can feel like you don't want to live anymore. It's better to be dead than to be alive, right? So suicidal thoughts can come in depression. It can also come even if you're not depressed, right? But because now say you have something really, something stressing you out really badly, and then somebody might think, okay, I don't want to face this. I'd rather be dead than this. But with depression, these thoughts come constantly, right? Not everybody who gets depressed get the thoughts. Some of the people who are depressed can get suicidal thoughts. Anything else you want to guess? So sometimes you might feel really worthless. You might feel like, I'm not a really bright person. I'm not a useful person. There is no, I'm not productive. I am of no use to anybody. So feeling worthless is another negative thought that we can get. Anything else? Some people feel really pessimistic about the future, and they might start thinking that nothing is working out. You might feel like you are losing your friends, you are not really getting good marks, you're not doing well in school. So it's called feeling pessimistic. So pessimism about the future and feeling hopeless about the future, like it's simply I simply can't go on because nothing is going to go right and I'm never going to get out of this. So those are called hopeless thoughts of hopelessness and pessimism, and those are quite common in depression. Okay, and then some people might feel guilty, and they might feel guilty about little things that you and I would not, if you're not depressed, we wouldn't really bother about it. Like, for instance, I was really mean to my mother yesterday. I'm a really bad daughter or son, or you might think of something that you did some time back and feel really guilty about it, even though you've not really actually bothered about it so far. Once you get depressed, because you keep getting negative thoughts, you go back and you feel really guilty about things you might have done in the past. And also, another sort of very common symptom is anger. So some people, actually most people, can get angry when they're depressed. So we call it becoming irritable, which means you're sort of, for the slightest thing you get angry, you might shout, you might scold others, right? For things that you usually actually never really bothered about before. So anger, having negative thoughts, feeling guilty are some of the other changes that you might get in your thinking pattern. Then you might also feel you might find it difficult to remember things, right? And you might struggle to remember your everyday, your school stuff. You can have difficulty falling asleep. You will have difficulty eating. You won't feel like eating much. You'll feel like, like I said before, that you're not really a worthy person. So these are also commonly seen when somebody is depressed. Okay, now you might think, okay, I have some of these symptoms, and then you might think, am I depressed, and was I depressed at that time, and so on. But the thing about these symptoms are that they are sort of very, very strong if you're depressed. So, occasionally everybody has difficulty sleeping. But if you're depressed, you can't sleep every day. If you're depressed, your appetite, you lose your appetite every day. It doesn't come back after a day or two. And, you find it difficult to concentrate, you get angry all the time. So if those symptoms persist, we say at least for about two weeks, then it's most likely that you have a depression. So why is it so bad? What is it about depression that makes it so bad? What do you think?
Maybe you're not being productive when you are depressed.
Exactly. So depression has consequences, right? And one of the major consequences is that you can't do the things that you used to do. So if you're a student, you can't study, you can't attend classes, you can't get good grades. If you're a person who's working, you find it difficult to work, you find it difficult to concentrate on your work. So your productivity goes down, right? So your ability to study or learn goes down, your ability to work goes down. What else? What else can happen?
It affects your health as well as physical health.
Okay, so it can affect your physical health because you won't be able to eat. Your appetite goes down. So it can affect your physical health, as in your nutritional intake goes down. What else? Anything else that you can think of? Something. So we talked about suicide earlier. You can, you can feel suicidal and you can harm yourself. Either just harm yourself, or you can try to kill yourself and, end up actually losing your life. So that's a really serious consequence of depression. What other things? So your social interactions, your connections with others will also reduce, because when you're depressed, you don't, like I said before, you don't enjoy the things that you used to do. So you wouldn't want to go out with your friends, you wouldn't want to call them, you wouldn't want to go partying, right? So your social connections and your relationships will suffer, and you lose weight. Like you said, your physical health will suffer. And also some people tend to take more alcohol and smoke more, and maybe even take drugs when they're depressed. So that's also a really dangerous consequence of depression. Right. So these are the sort of major consequences of depression. Anybody you've seen or had any experience with who's had any of these consequences? Has anybody seen any had friends who've been depressed, who found it difficult to maybe do their A-levels, who've done brilliantly well in school but still didn't score really well in their A-levels because they've been depressed? It's quite common. Right. So why do you think it's common? Now, I said it's common to have somebody who's done really well in their O-levels and, done really well in school, and then they go on to their A-levels and they find it difficult, and some of them might go into a depression. So what do you think is the reason for that? What are the possible reasons for depression that you can think of?
Pressure or peer pressure.
Yes. So any sort of pressure, right? So it might be peer pressure, it might be your friends who are, it might be bullying, for instance. So if there's any sort of pressure coming at you, either from your friends or from school, from studies, from your parents, and as you grow up financially, right, it can push you into a depression. Anything else? So it's usually a collection of reasons. It's for depression or any other mental health conditions. It's usually not one reason. It's a collection of reasons. So even when it's stress, it's usually a collection of different stressors that add up. So have you heard the word coping or to cope? Have you heard that word before? We use it, in our everyday language to cope with something. So when somebody has stressors, right, what you tend to do is you tend to cope with it, or you try to cope with it. But when you have multiple stressors, or if that one stressor is really, really bad, like, really overwhelming you, then your ability to cope with that is lost. And it's when you can't cope that depression tends to set in. That is what we commonly see. So somebody say your mother or your father is ill, and then you look after them, and then they have to go into hospital, and they have to have a lot of medicine, and they can't work, so there's no money coming in. Right? So when you look at a scenario like that, then there are financial issues, then the person you really love is sick and suffering, you can't work because you're worried about them. So there are so many different stresses, and what happens is usually all of these add up and make us feel really low. Another cause is genetic. So it has what we call a familial tendency to have depression. So we see depression in families. So if your mom or your sister or your dad or somebody in your family has it, there is a chance that you can also get it. But it doesn't mean that you will get it. Because like I said, it's multifactorial. So it's a lot of different factors working together. Can't really recall what that is. We'll see when the words come. So another one is that, like I said earlier, when women have babies, there are certain changes in their body, and they are at higher risk of depression. So somebody who's just had a baby or had a baby within the past 1 year is a bit more at risk of depression than other people. And then people who take alcohol and who smoke and who take drugs are also at a higher risk of depression. Right. Okay. So this is now, I told you depression is episodic. It can occur again and again. So if somebody has had depression before, then you are at a higher risk of having depression again. So,
Excuse me, excuse the question. Might be a wrong question. So you said people that smoke or have alcohol have a higher chance of getting depression, right?
Yeah.
But let's take, yeah. So now, generally, what I know is that people take happier to let go of stress. So how can something like that lead to depression?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Does anybody else have an answer to it, or is it something that has occurred to them also? Or what do you think? Okay, so the thing with drugs and alcohol is that this belief that it makes you happy is just that. It's a belief. It's actually not the truth. So it's something that we have sort of assumed, and which society has taught us, and which the alcohol industry has also very nicely propagated and promoted to make us think that alcohol is fun, right? But if you look at it as a chemical, it actually doesn't give any happiness. And one way to prove it is if I ask, I'm sure most of you, some of you, or all of you maybe have actually had a little bit of alcohol at some point or the other, right? But when you drank that alcohol the first time, did it make you happy? Did it make you feel good, right? Now the honest answer is no. It would have made you feel awful because the taste is so bad, right? And then it interferes with the way you think, and you just don't feel really good. And that is because alcohol does not, as a chemical, does not cause happiness, right? But because there is this belief in ourselves that it causes happiness and it's something fun, that is, we associate alcohol with fun. Because of that, we believe or we convince ourselves that it makes us happy. So almost everybody who takes alcohol as a sort of as social drinkers, which means they're not really addicted to it, but they take it on and off, or even heavily, but they're not addicted. So if a lot of people, well, almost all of them believe that it makes them happy. So it's just a belief. It doesn't actually make them happy. But what happens is alcohol is a chemical that depresses your brain. So it tends to cause depression, actually. And people who take alcohol a lot are more depressed. But they just don't know it. So they think it's sort of the alcohol is making them feel better. They believe it, but it actually doesn't. It's just making their condition worse. And if you take the alcohol away, that is, if they stop alcohol and they stay without alcohol for a long time, their mood will tend to get back to normal if there is no other cause. I'm not saying that it's only alcohol. I'm just saying that alcohol also contributes to the low mood. So it's a myth that alcohol or drugs or even smoking gives you happiness.
Okay, thank you.
But it was a really good question, because this is what, when you go out into society, these are the things that you come across. So you'll come across, alcohol and drugs, and people will offer it to you. So it's really, I think it's really important that you look at it very critically. So don't take my word for it. I would advise you to just go and read up, maybe on the internet, but always go to a reliable site, like a really known site or something like that. What they say about alcohol and tobacco and drugs. I'm not saying to just what's the question, because this is something that affects all of us. So I think all of you should, when you're just a bit free, just go and check out what alcohol and drugs and smoking does to you. Because then when your friends sort of say, this is fun, come on, let's have a drink, you can always sort of make a decision for yourself and not be swayed by what other people think you should do, right? So, but people, like I said earlier, when I talked about the consequences, people who are depressed tend to drink more, because one is that they think it might make them happier, and also it in the short term, in the very short term, it tends to reduce your anxiety. So not long term, but short term, alcohol tends to reduce your anxiety. Right. So how can you help?
Sir, can I also ask a question?
Yes. Sorry, I can't hear you. Is it
Sir,
me
can I
or is it
also?
your connection?
Am I audible now? Hello.
Yes, you are.
Okay, doctor, you said earlier that depression can lead to a loss of appetite and losing your weight. Like, but can it also impact the other way? Like, can it result in like overeating as well? Like,
Yes. So it's not very common. The common thing is that you lose your appetite. But there is something called atypical depression, and in that you tend to sleep more and eat more. So not very commonly, rather rarely, it can happen. You might overeat. It might also be a little bit of a compensatory mechanism to make you feel good. You feel low, so you eat, trying to feel good about it. So you're absolutely right. Anything else, especially from things that we have talked about? Anything that's puzzling you or that you have seen which is different to what I've said? Okay. So how can you help? Number one is, now we talked about the symptoms of depression, the major symptoms and the changes in your thoughts and your appetite and sleep. So those will help you identify somebody who's depressed. One of the biggest things that strike you is that they change. So you might actually see the symptoms, or you might not see the symptoms that we talked about. You might just notice that they're different. This is not the same person whom you knew. And again, you might also notice that they're not doing well in their studies, or they're not, as talkative as they used to be. So this difference in their functioning or their behavior is one of the first things to strike you. So it might be useful to sort of think, okay, why is this person different, and what is going on? And you can look, now that you know that the common symptoms of depression, or the major symptoms, are sadness, tiredness, and a lack of enjoyment in activities. And then the other things also, like the loss of appetite or the increase in appetite. You can look for those things, right? And a really good thing you can do is you can listen. So if it's a friend who's sort of you think might be depressed, it's a good idea just to ask what's wrong or is everything okay, and then just listen. So when somebody is there to listen to you, it makes you feel better because you feel so sad, and when you share that sadness with somebody, it sometimes makes you feel a little bit better that there's somebody listening to you. So that's really important. If you have a friend or a family member who's depressed, if you can just listen to how they feel, and then it's about helping them. So there are different things you can do to help them, but the important thing is that you do something, that you don't turn your back on them, or that you don't keep it in your mind and think, okay, is she depressed or not, should I do anything or not, right? Sometimes we're not sure and we don't want to really go and talk to their parents or bring it up to a teacher because we think they get them into trouble. But it's really important to do something to help them. And you don't know what to do, and sometimes you don't have the energy or the motivation. We talked about motivation earlier. Somebody said lack of motivation. So you don't have the motivation to actually help yourself. It's really important that you help anybody that you think is depressed. So what can you do to help? Now that's the question. Okay, you might think, okay, I'm not a doctor. How am I going to help this person? So just being that friend who shares their burdens, especially if they have stressors, might be the thing that you can do to help. And then one of the biggest things to do is to try to reduce any stressors that there might be. So, for instance, if you have some sort of huge debt or some sort of other financial issues, then it's really important that you try to reduce it. If you have any problems, it's important that you try to solve those problems. So a person can help you, friends, an adult, another adult, a parent or a relation. So find some way to reduce your stresses. And then you might also need professional help. So when somebody is depressed, as doctors, we look at them to see how badly depressed they are, so how severely depressed. So we categorize them into having mild depression, moderate depression, or severe depression. Now, when you have moderate or severe depression, which is a diagnosis that a doctor gives, you really need to go for medication or some other therapies. But when you have mild depression, if you reduce your stresses, if you improve your quality of life, and you talk to somebody, it's quite, that is how you get over it. So you don't need medicine for mild depression. So professional help is from doctor, usually psychiatrists, like I'm a psychiatrist. So psychiatrists are the ones who specialize in depression. But even your family doctor can help you. They can prescribe medication, they can talk to you, and they can guide you to another doctor if needed. So have you heard about talking therapies? We call it psychotherapy. That's the scientific term or the medical term, but we call it talking therapies. So it's a bit like, it's like specialized. It's a type of therapy where you talk to the person who's depressed and help them get over their depression. So there are different ways of doing it, and you have to be trained to do talking therapies. Any questions?
Yes. So you told that talking to a friend or asking out about the problems can help him or her. No? What I've seen is when they get depressed, they tend to shut people out, as in they don't probably let anyone in. So what do we do then?
Okay, so one thing is they will not initiate, or they might not initiate talking to you. So one way to do it is just to go and talk to them and say, look, you're different. I think you're different. This is how you used to be, and now you're like this. Is something wrong? So we use what is called open questions usually when we are talking to somebody and we want them to talk back to us. So we don't ask, are you depressed? We say, you're different. I think you're different. Is something going on? Are you feeling, how are you feeling? Don't ask, are you feeling okay? If you ask, are you feeling okay? Then the tendency is to just say yes and, leave you. So just you can say, how are you feeling? Or just say, you look sad. So that is one way to get them to talk, and maybe not doing it in public, so going to a sort of a private place or catching them when there's nobody around and asking these questions might help. But even if you do it, they might shut you out. But that is a bit unusual, especially if it's a friend. So if it's somebody, who's always trusted you, who's been close to you, or even not too close, but just somebody who knows you a bit, it's a bit unlikely they will push you away unless you're severely depressed. So when you're really, really badly depressed, you tend to be a little bit irritable, like I said, or angry, and you get upset very easily, and they might push people away. But generally, if you are struggling with the mild to moderate depression, it's a bit unlikely that, but they might not come and tell you without you asking. That is true.
Yeah, so I think so. This is from personal experience. I had a friend. I think he was irritable. I think he completely shut people out. Yeah, he didn't really respond to how he was feeling.
Yeah.
So in that case, what do you think me or anyone should do?
Right. So that is true. What you're saying is true, because it depends on the person's personality also to a degree. So some people are a bit open, some people talk very easily, some people don't. So if you are by nature not somebody who opens up, then when you're depressed, you're very unlikely to open up, right? So what I would say is, if you have noticed something different about your friend and he's not talking about it, I would break confidence or confidentiality and then go and speak to somebody, an adult or somebody who is close to him, not a friend, like a relation, like a mother or a father, or maybe even your teacher, if you think it's suitable. Because if you think somebody is in trouble or somebody is depressed, then it's really worthwhile going and sharing that. Consequences of depression are not so good, right? They are not very safe consequences, and we don't want somebody to lose their life or harm themselves or fail an exam because they're depressed. So it might be worth it going to the next best person and telling them your concerns. And I think that's perfectly all right. I don't think it's breaking confidentiality. I don't think it's doing something bad to your friend, because your intention is good. It's to help your friend.
But that's like going behind his back, right? He might be mad at me for going behind him, and because when you're depressed, you don't want people to know you're depressed. So what then?
That is true. So that is a judgment call, and it's a very difficult one. I agree, but when you compare the seriousness of it to what you're doing wrong, when they're over their depression, they're not going to be. I don't think that person will be too upset with you, because when he's over his depression, he will understand why you did it. And he might actually have done it himself if he was in a similar situation. So it's a chance that you have to take, I think. If you can do it without breaking his trust in you, that's the best thing to do. But sometimes you can't. And sometimes it's about saving his life versus keeping quiet and trying to do what he does. And you have to do a judgment on that. So sometimes we do that too when we talk to a patient, and that if that patient reveals something about harming themselves, or if we feel they will harm themselves, then we break confidentiality and we go and talk to the family But we always tell the person first, I'm going to break confidentiality, I'm going to go and share this with your family because I think you are going to hurt yourself and I don't want that to happen. So, but it's easy for us because it's not our friend, and it's harder for you because it's your friend and you know you want to be that person's friend for the rest of your life. But sometimes it's better to have a friend for the rest of your life who's angry with you rather than not have him because he's killed himself. So it's a difficult judgment call.
Is there any course of action that? Hello?
Sorry, Kavisha, can you let me know if I'm going over time, please?
No,
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, is there any course of action that anyone can take without going to the parents? As in maybe talk. Yeah, without going behind his or her back.
Yeah. So the best thing is to talk to them and try to get them to open up and seek help. You can go with, if your friend doesn't want to do that on his own, you can offer to accompany him or her to a doctor or to a counselor or to somebody else who is not related, who you think can help. But the problem is that, I mean, if it works, that's fine. If he comes with you, that's fine. But if it doesn't work and he rejects it, and then if he hurts himself, everybody's going to blame you. And you are going to feel awful because you have taken that burden on yourself. So I would really not advise you to, I would advise you to try your best to get them to seek help, maybe go with them to help. And but if that fails, I would say talk to the person, talk to some person who's responsible, who can help, who he might, you know, he might forgive you for breaking confidentiality too at some point. But if he doesn't, that's, you can't help it.
Okay, this is another scenario. Sorry.
I think you sort of time with your friend.
So this is another scenario. Let's say this friend is stubborn, and let's say.
Excuse me for a bit. Sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So let's say this friend is stubborn, and let's say the parents don't really understand this. Sometimes the parents some parents tend to ignore it, saying
Yes.
this is just a phase, teenage something.
Yeah.
So what then?
Well, you can approach, I mean, you can go and speak to a doctor with just your friend if your friend is not rejecting it. Counselors are also available. So, counselors are people who have been trained to listen to problems and help you solve them, but they're not doctors and they're not psychologists. So, they can't treat the depression or do any sort of advanced therapies, but they can help you. They will talk to you and help you solve any simple problems you have. So that is one thing you can do. You can access help for your friend from, with his permission, from a counselor or a doctor. If it's really serious, there are also certain services like Sumitrayo, who are there. So non-governmental it's a non-governmental organization they have counselors, and they also help people. So that is one thing you can do. But other than that, I really don't see how you can, you know, get around not sharing it with the family member, because ultimately it's the family who, you know, who's the closest sort of person to him in legal sense.
Okay. So the
So
thing
I
is
would
now
really
sometimes I think 20 plus, 20 to maybe 30, that's I think a really stubborn phase where you think you don't need help and you try to do things on your own. So how do you, and let's say he's a person that he's a stubborn person, and also let's say the parents don't understand also, what do you suggest doing
Well,
then?
there's very little you can do because you're not, I mean, you're not a therapist. You're not trained to handle a depressed person on your own, and you can't do it. Hi, did I lose?
Yeah,
lose
lost you at.
Can you see?
Yeah, I can see.
So I would really not advise you to do anything beyond what I've just said. It's simply because you're not trained to do it. You can talk to them. If they refuse to talk to you, there's very little you can do. Then you need to approach their closest relative, or a relative might not be the closest relative. You can always go for an aunt, a cousin, an uncle, somebody you know they have a good relationship with. If not, what you're doing is you're taking a very big risk in trying to tackle it on your own. I think we need to really go on from here, otherwise we're going to get stuck for time. Okay?
Okay. Sorry.
Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about suicide because that's one of the really dangerous consequences of depression. So what do you know about suicide? What have you heard, or have you had friends who unfortunately committed suicide?
Yeah, doctor, I had a friend. Her father is in there and her mother is abroad also in order to find finance to take care of her. And she was living with her grandmother, and she had once taken around 9 or something Panadols. That happened once, and then another time she had jumped from her balcony also. Thankfully she landed on grass and nothing happened, but yeah, that had happened. I mean, that was a personal experience.
Okay, so now when it comes to suicide, that's something that you know what you just said is something that we hear very commonly, and it's very common amongst young people, especially girls, and maybe up to the age of about 30 years, right? So when it comes to suicide or attempts to commit suicide, there are really serious attempts and then there are not so serious attempts. So, and the reasons for them can be many. Now, because we're talking about depression, we're not going to talk about all the other reasons that somebody might try to harm themselves. But when you're feeling really low, when you're depressed and you're feeling really low, you can feel very helpless. And sometimes your attempt at suicide is a cry for help. It's a way of trying to get help for yourself. It's the other extreme, and you just don't want to live, and you really, really want to die. So anybody's attempt at suicide can range from a cry for help to really not wanting to continue living. The thing is, we don't really know what that person is feeling or why that person does it. So, whatever the reason for it, excuse me. Okay, sorry about this. So, whatever the reasons, whether it's a very serious attempt or a not so serious attempt, we take it as serious. We don't sort of we don't say no, they are just fooling around or anything like that. So anybody is attempting any way on to harm themselves is considered quite serious. And the reason is because if you look at the people who actually end up killing themselves, quite a big percentage of them, nearly 40%, have actually tried it before. So when somebody tries to hurt themselves, it means that they're really struggling with something, and usually they tell somebody. So they might tell a friend or a parent, and somebody, or they might write it somewhere. Some people sometimes put it on social media also. We commonly say that they have, people who actually commit suicide have mentioned it in some form or the other before they actually do that. And what's important about that is that it's a golden opportunity for us to intervene. So if you have a friend who's saying, look, I don't feel like going on anymore, or I want to kill myself, I'm thinking of killing myself, it's really important that you take it very seriously and you get help for that person. Okay, because sometimes they might hint at it, and you might feel that if you ask about it, that it might make things worse, right? Because it makes you very uncomfortable to talk about it, and they don't want to talk about it, so you might try to avoid it. But that's not a really good thing, and it's actually a myth that if you talk about suicide, people commit suicide. It's a myth, right? So if somebody says something or hints at suicide or an intention to harm themselves, you really need to ask about it, and then you need to raise that and get help. So, So we see that people who actually end up killing themselves have attempted suicide before, and the majority of them tell their intention beforehand. And we need to remember that talking about it does not increase the risk of suicide. You need to talk about it. And sometimes just talking about it also helps. Because if your friend says, look, I'm feeling really helpless and I feel like I can't go on. And, if you say, look, no, don't do that. That's a silly thing to do. Your life is precious. Let's deal with this. Then maybe that will be enough to get them to take a step back. So, what makes a person at higher risk of suicide? Because suicide is not only with depressed people, right? Suicide is something that occurs even if somebody is not depressed, for other reasons also. So, right. So, risk of suicide, what is that? Okay. So, risk of suicide is higher if you are depressed or you have any other mental illnesses, if you have had previous attempts of suicide, if you use drugs and alcohol, right? If you're living alone or you have poor family support, you're boarded, or like your friend whose mom and dad were abroad, but she had the grandmother, didn't she? But people who tend to live alone, who are living alone, who are divorced, who are not in a relationship, tend to be more at risk of suicide than others. Okay. So how will you know if your friend is suicidal? What do you think would sort of be the danger signs? So if somebody looks depressed, looks very sad all the time, if they're talking about committing suicide in one form or the other, so might be hints, might be just saying, I don't think things are going to work out, the future doesn't look bright or something like that. If someone is hopeless, so if they're saying no, things are not going to work out, it's really useless doing this, it's useless studying, it's useless sitting for this exam, then that indicates hopelessness, and hopelessness is very closely linked to suicidal attempts. People who are hopeless are more likely to commit suicide. It's a really big danger sign. So those are things that will alert you to somebody committing suicide or imminently about to commit suicide. Right. So we are nearly done. How do you prevent depression? How do you stop all of you from getting depressed? What do you think? What are the things you can do to safeguard yourself against depression? Can anybody guess? So we said that when you have a lot of stresses, you are at higher risk of getting depressed. So try to reduce your stresses. So things that you know are stressful, which you can reduce, you reduce. For instance, if exams are real big stresses for you, for some people they're not, for some people they are, right? So you need to take certain steps to reduce that stressor. So it might be, say, studying from day one rather than waiting till the last moment. It might be not taking on too many subjects in one go. It might be not choosing subjects which you know are very difficult for you, right? So, for some people might not be relevant to you, but as you grow up, you will have to deal with working, earning money, and then you will take loans. So one very common stressor are loans. People tend to take loans which they cannot pay or which they find they pay with difficulty, and then the loans add up, and that triggers a depression. So not taking loans or making going into deals which can put you at financial risk is really important. So those are just two of the common stressors, but anything can be stressful, right? So try to reduce your stressors. And then you improve your well-being. So it might be taking a walk, doing some regular exercise, sleeping well. For some people, meditating. For some people, religious activities, being with friends, playing with your pets. So all those things actually make you happy, right? And when you're happy, that you are better able to cope with your stressors. So I'm sure all of you all are studying, right? So all of you will be stressed out with your studies. So, and there's no way you can take that away. That's part of your life, part of what you have to do. But if you can increase the happiness in your life by improving your relationships with your friends, with your family, and then doing some of the things that are there in the picture, getting good night's sleep every night, then you will be better able to cope with your school, your studies, and whatever stresses that they bring. Reducing alcohol, drugs, cigarettes goes a long way in reducing your risk of depression. And then having good relationships with your family, with your friends, all of those will protect you. And then get help. If you feel that your mood is going down, you are not able to, jump back up and be yourself again, get help early, because early, when you catch a depression early, it's really easy to treat, and it's, you don't have those bad consequences that I talked about. So it's really important that you get help early. And you can sometimes, if you're really stressed out, get help before you go into a depression. So those are some of the things you can do to prevent depression. Any questions? Anything you want to talk about or ask? You can even send a text in the chat box.
I was directed some questions from the participants. Can I read some of them out?
Go ahead.
If you are currently undergoing a similar situation, but you are not in a position to seek help from people, what are the things we can do to avoid the consequences?
So I'm just trying to understand the question. Do you think he or she means that they are depressed, but they can't get help. Is that what you're
They
saying?
are not in a position that they want to go to someone else for help.
Right. So, so if you think you're depressed, I would say you really need to get help, because it's really difficult to gauge how depressed you are when you are depressed. It's a bit like sort of like you have a pair of sunglasses on and you can't really see really well in a dark room if you have sunglasses on. So if you are depressed, it sort of colors everything that you see. So you're not a really good judge of how depressed you are and what you should do. So I would say if you think that you're depressed, you need to get help, even if that help is just a friend, and talking to that friend, right? And then that friend can sort of tell you what they think and whether they agree with you or whether you should get help or not. The things you can do are the same things that I mentioned in the previous slide. The question might have been sent before that slide came on. So it's reducing the stresses. So whatever is stressful in your life. Now, for instance, if you're depressed, even little things can be really stressful. So studies which you found really easy earlier when you were not depressed can be really difficult when you're depressed. And one reason is because you can't concentrate. Depression affects your ability to concentrate and attend to your work. And the other reason is that you're not in a mood to study and in a mood to enjoy what you're studying. So things that you might have enjoyed or done really well and not really found difficult when you are not depressed will be more difficult when you're depressed. Right? So you might have to, for instance, if you're sitting for an exam and you feel you're going into depression, you should consider either skipping that exam, giving a medical, or doing something. So that's one way of reducing your stresses. With how practical it is actually depends on your own situation. Other people can't judge. If it is whatever the other stresses are, the ones that you can take away, you need to take away. You need to give yourself a break. You need to be kind to yourself. Just like you'd be kind to somebody who's depressed, your best friend who's depressed, and you will help them all you can, you need to help yourself. Take a step back, reduce your stresses, try to reduce the happiness in your life, sleep well, eat well, try to do things that make you happy, like listening to music or watching a movie or some sort of leisure activity. Take some regular exercise. So not really going to the gym, but going for a walk. Because when you exercise regularly, there are things called endorphins, which are chemicals, which naturally occurring chemicals in your brain. And when you exercise regularly, the endorphins go up, and endorphins actually counteract your depressed mode. So they are the feel-good chemicals of your brain. So they make you feel good and they will counter the depression. Those are some of the things you can do, but I would say please get help. It's not, see, one of the problems with depression or any other mental health issues is that people feel really like they feel embarrassed, they feel scared, they don't want to go to a doctor, they feel that other people will look at them in a weird way if they know that they're going to a doctor for mental health difficulties. But if I don't think those are things that you should worry about. We are all human, and as human beings, all of us can have mental health difficulties at some time in our lives. So I don't think it's something you should be ashamed about. I think you should get help. Especially if you're feeling suicidal, I would say please don't try to handle it yourself. Get help. At least let somebody know how you're feeling. Okay. Other questions?
Doctor, I got quite a lot of questions here from the participants. The other one was, is it fine to share your depression story with a person who went through a serious depression phase?
Is it okay to share your own depression story with somebody who's going through a severe depression? Is that
Who went through a serious depression? Like, I think the person is going through depression and he's sharing it with
okay?
someone
So
who has.
you're afraid that for somebody who's already experienced the depression, that it might not be a good thing to share something sad with them. Is that what they are saying?
I guess so. Yeah.
So if that person, if your friend is no longer depressed, there's no reason why you should not share it with them. And actually, it might be a good idea to share it with them, because they will understand what you're going through and they might know how to help you because they've gone through it themselves and they might have access to help. So it's actually a good idea to share it with somebody who already knows about it.
The next question would be, when considering the statistics, are there increased rate of depression that is reported?
Yeah. So we are seeing more depression and more anxiety after the COVID epidemic came on. And we're seeing that not in people who have got COVID infections in them as well, but even people who have not got the infection, we are seeing more anxiety, depression, more substance misuse, so that is alcohol, tobacco, and drug misuse. We are seeing more of them. It's probably the change in the lifestyle, the reduction in income, the fear of getting COVID, for those who are quarantined, the social stigma that comes with that. So those are probably some of the reasons why people are becoming more anxious and more depressed. But it is true, it's more.
Doctor, the next question was, we have a friend who was depressed, grumpy, and irritating and said he wanted to get help. So we directed him to a university counselor who gave him some medication which he said are helpful. But he is addicted to the medication, and whenever he doesn't get the medication, he tends to get worse than he was before, which makes us feel partially responsible. What can we do?
Okay. Right. So, is that the end of the question?
Yes, doctor, it was.
Okay. So, generally, medication used for depression are not addictive. What we do is we give the medication and we give it, if it's the first person is having depression for the very first time, we will give it for about 6 months. And if they're very well after that, we tend to, what we say, tail it off. So we reduce it bit by bit till they're off the medication completely. And when we do that, people don't change. So it's a bit unlikely that they would have got depression medication, but there are other medication that we might use, which are not depression medication, but we might use for somebody to help them sleep and things. Those medication can be addictive, some of them, not all of them. So I don't think you should feel guilty. I think you all did the right thing. If he needed help, you directed him to help. If he's abusing some of the medication that was given, then that is on him, and I think you need to urge him to get help for that, because we can help him get off that medication, whatever is making him irritable, if he doesn't have it. Right? So the story makes me think that it's probably some sleep medication that he can't come off, rather than any antidepressants. Antidepressants are not addictive at all. So you don't have to fear the medication that we give.
Doctor, the final question is, now with the pandemic, all university students are studying from home, right? So since we are at home also, we have no other way of going out or meeting friends, or we are actually stuck inside. So I guess it is quite common to feel really stressed with all the work that we have and all that. So what can we do regarding that?
So within the limitations of the pandemic, you need to try to improve your social interactions. So maybe group WhatsApp and things like that might be sort of a way to keep in touch. We have to accept that there is a pandemic going on and that we can't have a normal life. So within the limitations that we have, we need to make the best of it. So one thing you can do is go for a walk. because that's something that's not forbidden. So, and that will keep your mental health up. It will make you feel better. So, going for a walk regularly, chatting with your friends, making it a point to chat with your friends, maybe, you know, once a day, or maybe every other day or something like that. Staying away from drugs and alcohol. Trying to spend a bit more time with your family to make things better. So, you know, some people garden, some people cook together. So, even though the pandemic is difficult, it's also brought a lot of people together, because you might know from your own sort of experience, you guys would go to, you know, your classes and then come back and then spend whatever little time there is in the evening on the phone or on the computer. You know, you wouldn't really spend a lot of time with your family, but now you're stuck with your family inside a house, so it's quite a good opportunity to regain those relationships that you all might have lost. Because when you have a good relationship with your family, it's a sort of a buffer against depression. Like I said before, people who are alone, isolated, who are not married or who are divorced are more likely to have suicidal attempts and get depressed. So having good relationships, building up your relationships is a buffer against depression. And you can also take up new hobbies, indulge in the hobbies that you already have, like listening to music, or you know, whatever makes you feel good. So you have to make sure you fit something into your day which makes you feel good. Another thing I'd like to tell you is that we have a national helpline. The National Institute of Mental Health has a helpline. The number is 1926 1926. So if you call that number, you can access help either for yourself or for a friend, or even get advice as to what you can do. There are trained nurses for counseling, and if the risks are high, if it's somebody who's say suicidal or who's feeling really low, they can access a doctor directly. And even if it's not somebody from Colombo, they can still, it's a national hotline. You can call that number and we will put them in contact with their area mental health services. So we can do that. So it's 1926. Anybody can call that and access help if they wish. Okay.
So those were the end of the questions, doctor.
So, Doctor, I have another question too.
Go ahead.
Okay, so like doctor said earlier, like especially in Sri Lanka, there is a social stigma about mental illness. So like, let's say you have a friend who you believe has mental illness, but like because of that social stigma, maybe he refuses to accept that. Like, then how would you go about convincing him? Or like, if he refuses to be convinced, then what would you do?
Okay, so it depends on how ill he is. If it's a mild depression, then you would just try to convince him to get help, and then if he doesn't, you can just take a step back and watch and wait. Because depression, like I said, is an episodic illness, and some people get over it without actually getting any help. So they deal with it one way or the other, and they get over it, and they go on, they recover. But if the risks are high, or if he's getting worse and worse, then I would say you need to convince them to get help. So maybe see what it is about getting help that bothers him, whether it's his own attitudes towards mental illness, or whether he doesn't want to go to a crowded place. If he's happy to meet a doctor online, that is also an option now. So try to sort of get him help in a way he's comfortable with. But failing that, it's going back to yours or your friend's question about, you know, what would you do in a difficult situation? It's a judgment call. And if the risks are high, I would say you seek help from somebody close to him, another adult, and try to get him help that way. But if it's not a very serious thing, if you think the risks are not high, or if so one way to judge that the risks are not high might be to see how well they're doing. So if they're doing their studies well, if they're still having social contacts and things like that, and not massively changed in their behavior, then you can just wait and see. But if there's a suicidal risk, if you're seeing very bad consequences like smoking and alcohol, other changes, not coping with the studies, then I would say you will have to take some drastic measures. Anything else?
Yes, doctor. Another question. Sorry. How does going through depression change a person's character? As in now you said sometimes a person can get over it by himself. Also, no. How would that change his character? Or if someone seek help, how would that change his character in the future? Can it change? Can it change, and how it would?
Well, okay. So there are two sort of ways of looking at your question. Now, one is that some people, most people recover completely from depression, but there is a percentage of people who might continue to have a few symptoms. So they're not depressed, they don't have all the symptoms of depression, but they might have a few symptoms left over even when they have recovered. So for somebody who's depressed, they might feel that they have not really got over the depression completely, and that we do see. But if you are functional and if you are able to get on with your life, and you are on medication and there is nothing much else you can do, then it might be a matter of trying to get on with your life. Then that is one, that is more the medical aspect of it. Then the other thing is that when you go through a depression, it's a life experience, and you don't forget it. You don't forget how bad you felt. You don't forget how sad you felt, how helpless you might have felt. So that every life experience tends to change you to a certain degree, and that's inevitable. So like that, depression will leave its mark on you in a certain way, at least in your memories. And that is, I guess, just part of life.
All right. And then what's better, trying to solve it yourself or seeking help?
Well, it depends on how it impacts, how much it impacts you. And if you feel that you're still having symptoms and it's impacting you, then it's worth seeking help. Because sometimes these leftover symptoms can be treated medically also. See, a lot of people have a resistance to using medication when it comes to their mental health. And one reason might be that you might view yourself as weak for seeking medication. You might view yourself as if you accept medication or you need medication, then you're a weak person. But that's not really true, because ultimately, if you look at the very basic change in depression, it's a chemical imbalance. So it's a change in the chemical composition of your brain cells, right? And that's not your fault, and it's not something you can change by willing it or wishing it or doing things. Doing things you can actually, if you do exercise and things, it changes the brain chemicals, but apart from that, it's very difficult to change. So it's not your fault, it's just something that has happened for whatever reason, and you need to get that chemical composition back to normal. So that's the only thing that medication does. It gets your normal chemical composition back for you. So it's not a bad thing to use medication. I think it's a worse thing to sort of not take medication, be stubborn about it, and lose your potential, because that is what you're losing. When you're depressed, you lose your potential, your ability to score, your ability to study, your ability to make friends. All those things are limited when you have depression. And if you can just take a tablet or take some medication for a short period of time, I mean, short is not a few days, might be a few months, or more than that. But if you can get your normal life back and if you can reach your full potential, so what? Just take the medication, live your life, be happy, rather than trying to be Superman and trying to get over it by yourself. Okay.
All right. Thanks, doctor.
Okay. Any more questions? Any thoughts, any stories you want to share? Anything that's puzzled you about a friend who might have a depression? Okay, so if not, then shall we wind up?
Thank you so much, Doctor, for conducting our workshop in spite of your busy schedule and educating us on this topic. And we would like to thank all the participants present here. We hope that you all got some insights from our doctor. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.